think I can say that Africa is now a continent of opportunities. One of the things that we need to highlight is that Africa is talking more and more with a lot of coherence. We are putting a lot of emphasis within the context of the African Union, looking at institutions that will integrate us better. With one voice on the climate change. We had a summit in Nairobi, and we were able to coalesce as a continent so that we can have a unified approach, a common approach. Recently, we have had a conversation on the replenishment of the IDA 21, which also dovetails into the ADF, Africa Development Fund, which will also be going in for replenishment next year. Now, I say that it's an opportunity because we are beginning to speak, to converge in our policies, in our approach. And many African countries are today conversing more on matters of integration, harmonizing financial policies, harmonizing economic policies. And indeed, where we have had what you might call truant approaches, the African Union itself is taking action where it suspends nations that are not conforming with proper democratic principles. And there are few that are facing that now. So I see Africa as a land of opportunity. We are getting our act together, a few challenges, no doubt, but it is a continent of opportunity.
Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Peljo?
Yeah, I would like to echo what colleagues have said here very well before. My background is in economics, so basically the GDP and economic growth comes from two different factors. The first one is the population growth, the amount of labor, and that's booming in Africa over the next coming decades. And then the other one is productivity, and that's again on the rising path in Africa. We are seeing a lot of development in urbanization, so that's energy demand, water and waste management systems, circular economy, and those are the topics where actually the Nordics are the most functional societies that are in place. We take pride of our engineering excellence. We are the best in terms of designing electricity networks and how to balance electricity systems. We are the best in terms of city solutions in heating and cooling. Then when it comes to waste management and circular economy, the Nordics are world leading in this regard. So that gives a very fertile ground for developing further our collaboration between the Nordics and the African countries. Then take another megatrend as well. Digitalization is something that's going to transform a lot of the ways how we deal and how business is done. And that's again a tradition that Nordics have in place. We have mobile network network companies, we have the infrastructure, and we have the services as well. And now, as we are seeing that Africa is really developing very fast, you are basically skipping some of the stages in development we've had in the past. So nobody has a landline. You're going to 100% mobile networks, and a lot of commerce and business is already taking place in a more modern way than in Central Europe, for example. So again, that lays a very good basis for us to increase collaboration, and I'm seeing a lot of traction from the Finnish industries towards the African growing economies, or the 5G tasks that are now and that's very good phase of development.
Thank you. I loved your questions to the last panels. If you have any questions. Minister Mudavadi, earlier this year an extensive trade agreement between EU and Kenya was signed. How can we ensure similar agreement is signed in the future?
Well, first of all, I'm a very happy man, not just on behalf of Kenya, but really on behalf of Africa, that we are now moving to a level where we can have such agreements. And I'm happy that the European Union went further and ratified it in their parliament. 2 weeks ago, the Kenyan parliament has also ratified the agreement. So it is now all systems go. Now, what is important is that we should actually encourage this kind of engagement because in the case of Kenya, this agreement has now opened an opportunity for us to access 27 European Union countries, duty-free for our exports, or tariff-free, and also quota-free. So now there's a serious agenda on our part to be able to go back and look at the value chains, working with our farmers, working with our manufacturers, so that we can take full advantage of this engagement. So I would say that it should not end with Kenya. And I'm happy to announce here that I think Rwanda has already indicated that they also want to pursue and achieve the same. And it is possible for other countries to be able to achieve that engagement. Yesterday when I spoke, I talked about intra-Africa trade as it stands now. Is about the volume is about 30% amongst ourselves within the country, and 70% of our trade is actually with the outside market, which is good. But we can leverage on that to also grow the intra-African trade and investment. And such agreements as the EPA provide that opportunity. And I think, is that to me?
Well, yeah, now it is.
I think one of the things is that we need to grow our private sector. That is really the long and short of it. So as we have efforts at bilateral level, we are looking at what standards, what are the issues, what is the environment that we are looking at. And that, for instance, the standards in Europe are extremely high in certain aspects, whether it is in terms of as it affects the greening, as it deals with aspects of human rights issues that relate to how you treat the labor and so forth. So all this becomes a confluence of important critical benchmarks that we must meet. And that is what will attract the private sector into the African continent. Over and above that, we then will have to look at how to improve our own domestic revenue generation, because as we expand the private sector base, then we are able to have greater levels of internal revenue. And these are critical because it's a fallacy for us to assume that all our infrastructure is going to be built by our friends or partners outside the continent. The bulk of it ultimately has to be done by ourselves. So the more we grow our private sector, the better it will be for us, and we'll be able to invest in our infrastructure. So that becomes extremely critical. But we can leapfrog. For instance, through digitalization. People like Apple, for instance, are employing about 23 Kenyans in Kenya. They have not migrated, but they're in Kenya, but employed by Apple. Now, this is another way of really broadening and getting resources systematically by sharing technology, making it affordable, and also appropriately skilling the young people in Africa. And I am sure that is where the growth of the private sector will come from.
Thank you. Mr. Lose?
Just coming from the bottom up as an investor living in CIP, and I say for investors it's only about two things. It's not necessarily about, of course, it's also about CO2 reductions and everything else. But you said it before, the business case has to stack up. It's about risks and it's about returns. That's the only thing that matters. So we raise money from institutional investors, and they are conservative. And we are investing to be sure that we can actually deliver the risk-adjusted returns. And this is the thing we need to work with. We need to develop the bankable project. And that we can demonstrate, showing that this is where money will actually. And there's a lot we can do to make those projects much more bankable. It's about securing offtake. If African countries investing in their grid infrastructure, cooperation between countries in Africa. One of the reasons why we invested in South Africa is because you can plug into the Southern African power pool, creates completely new possibilities and good prices for the product, those kind of things. And then with authorities in the Nordic countries, for example, that want to help with this, if we could together develop a financial product that could de-risk private investors. For example, taking first loss, if public money were willing to do that, were willing to invest in the development phase of projects. This is where it's super risky and where things don't go according to plan. Those kind of products, if we can develop that, we would be able to unlock much more private capital than we do. And the interest is there. We are currently raising a 3 billion euro fund for investments in growth markets like the African ones. We expect to do that purely on commercial terms, but if you want to go beyond that and getting close to a number like the ones you're mentioning there, we need new financial structures that can unlock this capital, and it's all about risks and returns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Gulfadottir.
Thank you. Just 2 points. I mean, of course, for the green transition to truly take off and other infrastructure projects in Africa, the private sector must play a central role. But we also have to have a very strong cooperation with multilateral partners, such as World Bank and Nordic Development Fund. And for example, the Nordic Development Fund has been very active in development of blended finance instruments aimed at attracting private sector financing to African countries. So it is always a cooperation in countries and Africa, and it's also a cooperation between the private sectors and the multilateral systems, where we also need to be more efficient, and that's the path that the World Bank, for example, is definitely on. But I just want to mention one other point. In Iceland, we've only been independent for 80 years, and 60 years ago or so, we had the first big long-term contract when we decided to build an aluminium smelter in Iceland, meaning that we got foreign investment into the country, a long-term contract, which meant that we could take the risk on building a hydropower plant, which is the foundation of our growth and sustainable development. So because of that long-term contract, we could also build the grid around the country. So the state did that, but we could, because we had a long-term contract with foreign investment, so we could do a long-term plan. So it was also a cooperation, which is, I think, and I believe, always the key for both Europe and Africa.
New markets always attract Wild West, gold-digging, kind of quick profit investors. How do we make sure that investment in infrastructure is actually truly sustainable?
The foundation is clear. That's why I emphasize the strong and clear framework. That's like, if countries want to do their homework, I would say start there. So the rules are obvious from the beginning, and that means that the wild cowboys that are not there for good, they will look in a different direction, I believe.
Thank you. Mr. Pellew, same question.
Yeah, and that's of course always the issue. When you have a very attractive market that's developing fast, you have these cowboy players as well. And that's of course where the collaboration between the governments, both kind of inbound and outbound, and then companies themselves is really important. And that's where I think the Nordics again are outshining. Our kind of relationships between the governments and companies are pretty straightforward. Our business practices are very sustainable, and Nordic countries are consistently ranked amongst the most sustainable companies in the globe. So that's where I see that, again, there's a huge potential for collaboration between the Nordic and the African countries because of our ability to bring on board a good collaboration with governments and then engage in very sustainable and long-term business relationships. And as Thori said, it's about the longevity of these investments. We're talking about infrastructure that's with a lifetime of 40+ years. So hence, kind of creating stable conditions and de-risking those investments is of crucial importance.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I asked the last panel, because we have today a focus on actual action, leaving this meeting today, what will you do differently? Mr. Lose, we'll start with you.
We'll just keep our nose to the grindstone, keep developing projects on the ground and invest in those projects. We'll continue our work. We have excellent cooperation with, for example, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs on helping us understanding and navigate the market out there. We will continue our cooperation also with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also the World Bank and some of the other global institutions on how to create this financial product that can help us raise more money from private investors. That's going to be crucial if we want to get to the numbers there. Because it's also about bigger things than just returns and risks, so although that's what we do for a living. When we do the calculations, when we do $1 of investments in South Africa, for example, we create 3 times as many CO2 reductions as we do from $1 in Denmark, for example. And trust me, it's much more easy to do business in South Africa than it is in Denmark, but different matter. So we'll just continue doing this, doing it bottom up. I think that's the most important thing, so we can actually demonstrate on the ground that this can be done with healthy returns for investors.
Minister Gylfadóttir?
Well, I think actually this morning here is a great example of what we can do differently. Instead of spending most of the time when we meet sitting around in a circle, having our interventions from our talking points, and the hours just pass by, I think it's more important to get to get to know each other and to have a concrete setup like here, where we're also mixing the politicians with the private sector, for them to be able to have personal connection, to then have a follow-up after a meeting like this. And eventually, I'm just a very big believer in personal contacts. With more people-to-people relations, I think we can actually do great things. So being more focused, more concrete, and mixing the private sector and policymakers and politicians more often together with enough free time to actually talk to each other, to listen to the answer, not only reading from the paper and you're not waiting for any response. I think that would be an excellent development to continue.
Thank you. Minister Mudavadi.
Well, what would we do better? I think we should stop selling fear. Mm-hmm. Because I think we've been on a journey for too long trying to give the impression that the risks in Africa are insurmountable. But we now need to break away from that and sell Africa and get people to understand Africa as a continent of opportunity. Because the challenges we face are really no different. Because even today, Europe is facing a new kind of challenge with the conflicts that have come to Europe. The Middle East is facing their challenges. So we need to broaden our scope and then see how we can leverage on some of the institutions that can provide risk cover. Within the World Bank, we have the MEGA, which achieves the same. Here, I've actually mingled with 1 or 2 people who are able to provide that kind of risk. So it's a question of assessing. And there are good opportunities. And if I give an example of Kenya, for instance, we are today at 93% green energy levels, perhaps the highest that you can easily find within quite a number of countries at this point. It's mainly hydro and mainly geothermal. My sister here is also strong in geothermal in Iceland. And we have an opportunity, for instance, to start looking at the Inga Dam in the DRC more seriously. That would give us maybe 100,000 megawatts of energy. But we are sometimes obsessed in selling fear to the extent that we are not looking at it. But I want to say that Africa has moved a long way. They have institutions that are working. They have legal systems that are working. They have judicial processes that are working. So that even aspects of arbitration on some of the challenges we face, there is a legal mechanism to deal with some of these issues. So the risk that we always perceive, we can move away from it. Let us work together, have more data, have more evidence-based decision-making in terms of the businesses issues that we want to make. Let us work together and leverage on the technology levels that you have here. We don't have to go and reinvent new technology around the greening aspects. We come to the Nordic countries, you're perfect at it, why don't we pull together? Make it affordable, make these opportunities also affordable to the African continent. And I believe we have the capacity to do so.
So much potential there to be released. Thank you very much, Minister.